Good evening, dear students. I welcome you all to today's session for auditing and assurance subject. So I can see many of you have already joined. And students, today we'll be starting with chapter number 7, which is audit sampling. But before starting with the chapter for today's session, let me just ask you a few questions. First of all, I want to know whether till chapter number 6 that you have covered in your last session, whether you have understood everything in entirety. So quickly send in your reply. Also, many of you have already shared your study schedule with sir, right? Which is really appreciable. Many of the students have messaged sir that they are following the strategies, the techniques that have been discussed with you, with CA Rajesh Sachdeva sir, which is really very, very good. So students, please start, learning. Understanding part is done, but start learning. And how will that be possible? If you follow the techniques that are shared with you by CA Rajesh Sachdeva sir, and he'll be coming in the next session where you can discuss with him all your queries, and he'll be sharing further wisdom with you. So I can see many of you are saying, Hitesh is saying, ma'am, yes, understood. Karthik is also saying understood. So with a very positive note, let us start with today's chapter, which is audit sampling, chapter number 7. Okay? So Aditi is saying, ma'am, understanding is done, but learning is left, which should not be left. Hana Aditi, so start learning today itself and start following the techniques, the strategies, whatever has been discussed with you by sir, and you will be getting an insight about more strategies in the next session. Okay? Now, students, you all are aware as to what is audit. Okay? Let me just share the screen. You all are aware as to what is audit. Okay? Still, for your revision purpose, I've mentioned this definition again. A quick revision of this definition, that audit is an independent examination of financial information of any entity, whether profit oriented or not, irrespective of its size and legal structure, where such an examination is conducted with a view to expressing an opinion thereon. Okay? Try to learn this definition by breaking it into parts. Okay? Now, my question to you is, tell me in a very common language, what do you understand by the term sampling? Sampling. Quickly, I need answers. Try to make this session as interactive as possible. How will that be possible? You just need to send in the answers to my query quickly. I'm waiting for your replies. What do you understand by sampling in general language, in layman's language? Abhi, I'm not discussing about audit sampling as such. So see, if you look at the dictionary meaning of the term sampling, so sampling is the action or process of taking samples of something for analysis. Or in other words, it is the selection of suitable sample for study. Okay? So many of you are saying obtaining samples from a larger population, which is absolutely correct. Shakti Velan said this. Then Akshanil is saying sampling is selecting units from a larger population. Okay. So whatever answers you are saying, Annie, Kiran, Aditi, Meghna, Pothina, Sudhanshu, every one of you is correct. Okay? Now let us try to first understand the concept of sampling in general language. Then we will try to relate it to audit sampling. Okay? Now let us take this example. What are these? What are these? These are grapes. Hana? Now if you have to buy the grapes and you want to have sweet grapes, okay? Now what will you do? You may pick up 1 or 2 grapes, you may taste them, and based on your tasting of those 1 or 2 grapes, you may conclude that the entire bunch of grapes is either what? It can be the sweet or it can be sour. So in order to buy a bunch of grapes, are you eating all the grapes? No. You are picking up 1 or 2 grapes. Based on the tasting of these 2 grapes, you are concluding about the entire bunch of the grapes. Okay? What was that? You have taken 1 or 2 sample from the bunch of grapes. Okay? Let us take another example. See, whenever the doctor has to examine your blood in order to see whether there is any deficiency or not, he will not take out the entire blood from your body. He will just take a few drops. Blood sample will be taken, and based on the analysis of such blood, he will draw conclusion about the blood constitution in the body. So what is done here? Again, a blood sample. So in order to see whether the entire bunch is sweet or not, in order to see the constitution of the entire blood composition in the body, sample has been taken, right? Not the entire blood or not the entire grape bunch has been tasted. So this is the concept of what? Sample. We taste a sample and then we decide about the entire bunch. We test the blood and then we analyze it, and then we the doctor draw a conclusion about the entire blood composition of the body. So this is, in a very general term, sampling. Now, why there is a need of sampling? What is sampling? Let us just look at the meaning of it again, the dictionary meaning. The action or process of taking samples. So when I'm picking up 1 or 2 grapes, so that is the action of taking samples of something. Something in my first example is what? Grapes, for analysis, whether it is sweet or sour. Okay, clear? So why sampling is required in auditing also? Okay, so students, see, traditionally what used to happen is, be it a large organization or a small organization, the auditors, they need to check all the transactions in detail without any exception. So basically, routine checking of transactions, all the transactions was done. Okay. However, see, when you are checking each and every transaction, for example, there are payment of wages to 10,000 workers, and you are checking each and every wages payment, it will involve time as well as cost. So it is not economic. This exercise of routine checking of all the transactions without any exception, it becomes what? Economically wasteful. Why? Because huge costs are involved, huge time, the resources, that is the team members, they get involved. Okay? Further, students, with the passage of time, there has been a system of formal internal control which has been designed, implemented, and maintained by the client organization. So the possibility of routine frauds and errors automatically reduces. Why? Because there are now internal control in place. So the auditors, they realize that with less than 100% checking also, they can get good satisfaction, right? By checking just a sample, few of the transactions, they can get good satisfaction. Yes, while they are selecting this technique, what technique? This is called sampling only. So while they are selecting the samples, they need to follow certain standards, certain techniques, so that, like, if each of the item has an equal chance of selection, if they are selecting the items from the population on a random basis, then that sample which gets selected, it will definitely represent what? The features and characteristics of the population. Now, what is population? What is sample? Let us just try to understand this with the help of an example. For example, the auditor has to check the trade receivables of an organization. So a list of all the trade receivables become what? Population. Okay? A list of all the trade receivables. Just a minute. So let's say there are 10,000 trade receivables, ठीक है, A, B, C, D, E, F, and 10,000 in number, ठीक है, of so and so amount, ठीक है, of my client. Now this entire list, if auditor, if I decide to check these trade receivables, the list of trade receivables, the entire list becomes what? Population, right? And since it is not possible to check all the receivables, 10,000 trade receivables in detail, if I opt for sampling, what will I do? I'll select a sampling from where? From this population itself. So the individual units in the population, they are what? They are sampling units. They are what? Sampling units. Okay? And the item that I select, let's say I select ABC, I select, let's say there was XYZ also, and MNO. Okay? I select, let's say, 1,000 trade receivables. So out of these sampling units, which is what? Each item of population, the items that I select for analysis, they become my what? Sample. And the sample should be selected in such a way that it represents the entire population. How will that be done? We will be discussing later on. But abhi ke liye, just abhi tak what I have discussed is what is sampling in general terms, whereby we took the example of grapes and blood sample. Then I told you that in auditing, traditionally 100% checking was done. Routine checking without any exception, which was an economically wasteful process. Why? Because auditors realized that by checking much lesser number of items, they can get good satisfaction, right? How? If they select the sample by using if they randomly select the sample, okay? Obviously, for applying the sampling, they have to adopt certain techniques, for which we will be studying about essay 530 today. Okay? So just tell me whether a briefing as to what sampling is in a very general language, whether it is clear or not. Then we'll go forward with sampling with respect to auditing. Quickly tell me, clear? Sri Yoga Vishwas is saying he's waiting for the lecture. I was also waiting to take the lecture, to take the session. So quickly tell me whether it is clear or not. Okay. Now, my next question to you. Tell me, what do you think? Is sampling mandatory for an auditor to use? Be it a large organization, be it a small organization, is it mandatory? Quickly send in your replies, yes or no. Once you send in your reply, a number of the topics will be covered. See, sampling unit, Sri Yoga Vishwas, sampling units are what? All these which make the population. All 10,000 units, and the sample is what? These 10,000 these 1,000 units. So sample is the 1,000 units, and sampling units are how many here? 10,000. Is it clear? So see, it is not mandatory as such for the auditor to select sample, to conduct audit sampling. Why? It all depends upon auditor's professional judgment. It all depends upon auditor's professional judgment, and auditor's professional judgment will take into account various factors which we'll be discussing just now. Okay? Absolutely correct. Depending upon the organization, Shivam is saying yes. But who will decide that? Auditor's professional judgment. Okay? Now, my next question. You all have done in detail in chapter number 3 about testing of internal control, and that is TOC, and test of details, that is the substantive procedures. Now my question to you, tell me, what do you think? Can sampling be applied, audit sampling, while performing test of control or test of detail or both? So you may write A, B or C. A stands for test of control, B stands for test of detail and C stands for both. Quickly send in your replies. What do you think? So many of you are saying both, which is absolutely correct. See, what will happen is just an idea as to how audit sampling will take place. See, it might happen that, let's say our auditor, he wants to check the sales of ABC Limited. Okay? Now, first of all, he may select a transaction on a sample basis, whereby he is doing a walkthrough test of this transaction. What is walkthrough test? That is, he's checking this transaction from the very beginning till the end. Okay? So he may select one or two sample of sales, whereby he'll study the transaction from the very beginning, the point when the order is received, till the point, till the end, that is walk through. He will walk through each and every stage of this transaction. Why? Because here he wants to realize, he wants to understand what is the risk associated with this transaction, what are the internal control associated with this transaction, and what is the accounting with respect to this transaction. Okay? Now, once he have understood that, okay, these are the risks, these are the internal control, these are the accounting, he will now perform test of control. That is, he'll be checking the internal control. And students, see, 100% checking of controls is not possible. So he may check a few internal controls in order to see whether they are operating effectively or not. Whether they are operating effectively or not throughout the period, right? And if he finds, like, whatever is his conclusion about the test of control, when he tested the internal control on sample basis, then he will decide his sample for test of details, for substantive checking. Okay? Based on his assessment of test of control, he'll then accordingly decide his substantive checking ka sample. For example, let's say he finds that when he performed test of control on certain with respect to internal controls, he found that they are not operating effectively. Quickly tell me, what do you think with respect to the substantive testing? Let's say with respect to sales, the auditor understands that the internal control are not operating effectively. So now with respect to substantive testing, when he's selecting a sample, will it be more or less? The extent of selecting, whether the sample size will be large or small. He has understood that the internal controls are not working properly with respect to this particular internal control. Himanshu, Annie, Pothina, Sonika, they are saying large, which is absolutely correct. And Dhanya Lakshmi, see, you all have already done in chapter number 4 about whether an auditor is required to obtain an understanding of internal control. Okay? Now let us just try to understand. See, BRS, preparation of BRS. So basically the query of Dhanlakshmi is, ma'am, why is audit sampling relevant for test of control? See, let's say the company has, let's say 15 bank accounts. Okay? With respect to this, every month, the BRS is prepared. BRS is what? Internal control. Okay? Now, is it practically possible for the auditor to check the BRS for every month for every bank account? It may involve a lot of time and cost. So auditor may do it on a selective basis, on a sampling basis. Okay? Dhanalakshmi, is it clear? So sample checking of internal controls will be done. Okay? Auditor may select, let's say in case of a large organization, 25 or 26 samples in order to see whether the internal controls are operating effectively or is there any deviation, है ना? Same way with respect to the test of details, that is substantive testing, auditor will also select a sample. So Dhanya Lakshmi is saying it is clear. Okay. So many of you are saying that it will increase the sample size. Why? Because the internal controls are not working properly. Students, you have done this concept in essay 315 also. Identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment, है ना? Including its internal control. If you remember, कि internal control का understanding तो लेना है ना. How to obtain that is one of the ways is also audit sampling. Okay. Now, one more concept before I take you to the module. Essay 500. You all have done essay 500. I'll not show you the name. Quickly tell me what is the name of essay 500, so that you also become aware as to what you have actually learned. See, Sriram, if the auditor is not satisfied with any of the internal controls, so what he can do is he can take more sample. If there is a mistake or there is a deviation in that sample also, he may take more sample. And if there is still a deviation in internal control, the sample he has taken, it is not working properly, then he may say that I will not rely on the control. He may revise. He may change his substantive testing. That is, he'll be checking everything in detail. He will not go for much of audit sampling. Okay? So everything depends upon what? Auditor's professional judgment. Okay? Sriram, is it clear? So absolutely correct. Essay 500 is what? Audit evidence. So students, essay 500 says that the auditor needs to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence in order to form a conclusion so that he can give an opinion. Okay? And in chapter number 3, you must all have done that essay 500 also specifies the means of selecting the items for testing. Hana, essay 500 contains the means as to what items to select. Essay 500 gives a guidance to the auditor. So what are the 3 means that are given by essay 500? So essay 500 says that there are means available for selecting the items for testing. Auditor may select all the items. That is 100% testing may be done by the auditor. Auditor may select certain specific items. Example, high value item. Example, unusual transactions. Example, risk prone transactions like your related party. Hana? So this is mentioned in essay 500 itself, and the last is what? Audit sampling. So I can say, and it is mentioned in essay 500 that essay 530 gives in detail about what? Audit sampling. So I can say that essay 530 complements essay 500. ठीक है? 500 क्या बताता है कि ऑडिट एविडेंस लेना है which should be sufficient and appropriate, and it says that auditor सुनो, जब आपको ऑडिट एविडेंस लेना है then you have to apply the audit procedures. So the items on which you have to apply the audit procedure, there are 3 ways you can select those items. First is you may go for 100% item selection. Like let's say there is a small organization, so 100% checking can be done. Okay? Then the second way is what? Selecting of specific items like high value item, unusual transaction, or transactions which are prone to risk. For example, related party transactions. Okay? And the last one is what? Audit sampling, the details of which are given in essay 530. So essay 530 in essay 530 we'll be discussing about the meaning of term audit sampling, the various approaches to audit sampling, what are the various methods. Okay? We'll be discussing about the objective, the scope, right? So all these things we will be discussing in today's session and the next session. So tell me whether it is clear or not. अभी तक हमने क्या समझा है? We have just understood कि audit sampling कहाँ से, auditor को कहाँ से which essay permits the auditor to go for audit sampling? So first of all, the essay 500 says that audit sampling is also one of the means of selecting items for testing. Or auditor पूछता है कि okay, from where can I see all the provisions in detail? So it says that essay 530 you need to refer. So I can say essay 530 complements essay 500. Okay. Then we have understood what is meant by sampling in a very general language. Then we understood that sampling is relevant for test of controls also and for test of details also. I gave you an example that how an auditor proceeds with audit sampling when he is conducting the audit. Okay? So I hope it is clear. See, test of details, Pooja, it means when you are checking the transactions and balances. Test of control is what? Testing of the internal control which has been designed, implemented and maintained by the management, by the client organization. And substantive testing mein kya aata hai? Test of details, vouching, your verification, when you're checking the transactions, the account balances in detail. कि sales का एक particular आपने invoice उठाया, you are seeing whether calculation ठीक है या नहीं, everything, the accounting is proper or not. So test of details, vouching and verification. Is it clear? Yes, BRS prepared is one of the internal control. कौन prepare करता है here? BRS, it is prepared by the management. Is it like required somewhere? No, it is one of the internal control itself. Physical verification of inventory. Again, one of the example of internal control implemented by the management. ठीक है, Hiran? Pooja, is it clear? Hiral, is it clear? ठीक है. Now, let us just start with SA 530. Let us have a look at the module. So, SA 530, and what is the name? Very simple, audit sampling. So, SA 530, first of all, explains the term audit sampling. Okay. Now, students, don't look at the module. Just tell me what you understand by audit sampling. समझ आ गया, ठीक है? That I gave you an example that on trade receivables, the auditor has to check, let's say, about whether the trade receivables are appropriately accounted for in the books of accounts. So he took an entire list of the trade receivables, but they were 10,000 in numbers. Okay? So he selected certain items which were 1,000, which is what our sample. Now he analyzed those 1,000 transactions, and whatever conclusion he drew on those 1,000, he concluded the same with respect to the population. Okay? So this is audit sampling general language. Now tell me, what do you understand? Just give me the definition that comes to your mind. Don't look at the book and just tell me what do you understand by the term audit sampling. So Karthik is sending me the summary. Let me just have a look. So Karthik, Karthik has basically summarized whatever we have discussed, and which is a very good presentation. You need to make your notes in this way only. So he has mentioned that sample randomly selective units, which represents whole population. In earlier regime, 100% checking required, now not required. Because there is controls implemented by management. So correct. Okay. Now let us just have a look at the definition from the module. Okay. So I've written it here. So audit sampling is application of audit procedures, okay, to less than 100% of items. See, what is my 100% of items? In our example, the entire list of 10,000 trade receivables. Okay? From these, I have selected what 1000. So this 1000 is less than 100% of items. So application of audit procedures. Now auditor or I will be applying my audit procedure on these 1000. Na? Then whatever results I'll get, I will project it on the entire population of 10,000 trade, list of 10,000 trade receivables. Okay? So application of audit procedures, okay, to less than 100% of items. 1000 is less than 100% of 10,000 within a population relevant under audit. So my population here consists of what? Trade receivable list. Okay? Relevant under audit, such that all sampling units are how many here? 10,000. Jitna bhi all sampling units, jitne bhi yahan pe units the 10,000 in number, they have equal chance of selection. They have equal chance of selection. Okay? So just keep this example in mind. I'll repeat it again. Application, see, with respect to those 1000 trade receivable sample that you have selected, what will you do? You will just document that list? No, you will apply audit procedures on them. Hana? You will analyze the whatever is the results. You will conclude on those 1000, and whatever conclusion you draw. See, in our example of grapes, I took 2 grapes. I tasted them. I found them sweet, and then I said the entire bunch is what? It is sweet. Right? Same way, when I'm selecting 1000 trade receivable, I'll check them. I'll perform the audit procedures on them. Okay? And based on the results on these 1000, I'll project it on the entire population. So application of audit procedures samajh aata hai. To less than 100% items. Items are to be selected from the population itself. Here my population is what? Trade receivable. If I was checking trade account payables, the creditors, then my population would have been what? The entire list of what? Creditors. Relevant under audit, such that all sampling units, so I'm not saying those 1000, I'm saying those 10,000, all sampling units have equal chance of selection. So what is sampling unit? All the items in the population. See, jo select kiya hai, wo kya hota hai? That is, selected item is what? Sample. ठीक है? And it should represent entire population. ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए that with respect to, let's say, the trade receivables from April to March, you have selected only April and March ka data, the opening and the closing wala year, month. ठीक है? So all the items, they should have the item selected should represent the entire population. ठीक है? Is it clear? See, audit procedure includes everything, na? If you remember, you all have done the definition of risk assessment procedure. You all have done the definition of test of control. You all have done the definition of substantive procedures. All these definition begins with the term audit procedures. So whatever data I'll collect, I'll select on a sample basis. क्या करूंगी उसको? क्या फाइल में डॉक्यूमेंट कर लेना है क्या? नहीं, आई चेक दैट. एंड हाउ एन ऑडिटर चेक्स? बाय परफॉर्मिंग ऑडिट प्रोसीजर्स. ठीक है धनलक्ष्मी, इज इट क्लियर? See, now how all items get a fair chance of selection? Here we'll be seeing there are various techniques. Statistical techniques are there which uses what? Probability theory. So that ways all the items get a fair chance of selection. How is that possible? We'll be discussing later on. So abhi I have just discussed the definition of audit sampling, which says application of audit procedures to less than 100% of items within a population relevant under audit, such that all the sampling units have equal chance of selection. It should not happen. Let's say I gave you example of trade receivable, so substantive testing. So it should not happen that, let's say, with respect to the testing of internal control, it should not happen that I am checking the internal control with respect to April and May month only. So if I'm selecting a sample, then throughout the period, what is the operating effectiveness of the internal control, all those samples should get selected from throughout the period. ठीक है? Yes, Karthik, you are correct. ठीक है? So is it clear? And item selected should represent the entire population. Now, what is the objective? Very simple. The objective is to provide reasonable basis. You all know that absolute assurance is not possible, है ना, when we are doing auditing. Sampling has its own inherent limitations. ठीक है? So to provide a reasonable basis so that the auditor can draw conclusions about the population. See, if my population is sales, or let's say, if in our example it was trade receivable, based on the sample that I have drawn, I will be able to project the conclusion with respect to trade receivable only, na? I cannot infer for the entire financial statement. Hana? So when I'm checking the sample of 1,000 trade receivables, I will be able to understand about the 10,000 trade receivable, not the entire balance sheet or the entire P&L. Hana? So it provides a reasonable basis to draw conclusion about the population from which sample is selected. So in our case, it was what? Trade receivable. Is it clear? Now, what is the scope? So first of all, though, I have already asked you that whether applying audit sampling is mandatory. So it is not. Hana? It might happen that auditor, just a minute. Just a minute. I hope the screen is clear to everyone. Okay. So, what is the scope? So, SA 530 says that when is SA 530 applicable? Is it applicable every time the auditor is conducting audit? No. It is applicable every time the auditor is using audit sampling. Hana? Very logical. If auditor is not applying audit sampling, let's say there are 1,000 transactions, he's checking all the transactions, he's not opting for audit sampling, why will he refer to SA 530 then? Okay? And it includes the application of statistical sampling and non-statistical sampling. We will discuss as to what are statistical sampling and non-statistical sampling further. The scope of SA 530 extends to the entire sampling process. Okay? Starting from the design and selection of audit sample, then including the performance of audit procedure on those sample, and then evaluating the results from the sample. So SA 530 gives a guidance to the auditor with respect to the entire sample process. So if you just, we will be discussing about sample process in detail, there are certain steps. But if you try to understand majorly, it can be divided into 3 parts. That first of all, auditor will design and select the sample. Then the sample which he has selected, he'll perform certain audit procedures. Okay? And then he will evaluate the results of that sample. Okay. Now, see, Dhanalakshmi is saying, ma'am, can you please give example of audit procedure which auditor will perform here to trade receivable? So let us say that auditor has to send balance confirmation. Okay? So it might be possible na, that auditor doesn't want to send balance confirmation to 10,000 trade receivable. He'll select it on sample basis. Okay? And with respect to the 1,000 that he has selected, he might send what? Positive confirmation. You have done the concept of positive confirmation request and negative confirmation request. So he may select the trade receivable on sample basis to whom he wants to send positive confirmation request, that positively he needs an answer. Hana? And he may select some sample whereby he's sending what negative confirmation request. Okay? So any audit procedure which he wants to perform, let's say he wants to see whether the tax calculated is correct or not, GST, he may select few samples and then on those trade receivable, the selected sample, he will recalculate. Recalculation is one of the audit procedures. So he's recalculating it on the sample instead of recalculating it on the entire 10,000 trade receivable. Dhanalakshmi, is it clear? So I hope it is clear. Hana? Scope, very simple, that applicable when the auditor is using. Hana? If he is not using audit sampling, SF 530 is not applicable. And it covers both statistical and non-statistical. And it gives the guidance to the auditor for the entire process of sampling, starting from selection, designing of audit sample till the evaluation of the results from the sample. Okay? Clear? Quickly send in your reply. Whatever we have done, is it clear or not? Students, you should be able to understand. You should be able to find it easy to learn also. Send in your replies. How to select the sample, Karthik will be discussing later on. There are topics of sample selection, the entire sampling process, whereby we'll be discussing about sample design, sample size, selecting of items, then we'll be discussing your query. So many of you are saying it is clear. Now, what is population is clear to you. Okay? But let us just have a look at the definition which has been given by SF 530. Then we'll be discussing about the various characteristics that should be there in the population. Okay? Now, first of all, let us go back to the example of 10,000 trade receivables. Okay? So the 10,000 trade receivable was my population. Now tell me, if this list is not correct, can my sample be correct? And if my sample is not correct, can my conclusion be correct? Send in your replies. If the population from which I'm selecting the sample is not correct, it is not appropriate, it is not complete, it is not reliable, let's say, whether my sample will be appropriate, complete or reliable? So the answer is no. Himanshu, Hitesh, Pothina, then okay, many of you are saying no, which is absolutely correct. So the concept of population is very, very important. See, auditor decides as to what should be the population. That is, what are the items from which sample is to be selected. Hana? So unless and until the population is correct, the sample will not be correct. So Aditi is saying, what will happen if we will select a wrong sample? Then wrong conclusions will come now. That is why auditor is advised to use standards and techniques when he is applying audit sampling. And students in big firms, there are softwares that automatically see the team or the principal auditor, the engagement partner, what he does, he enters what risk he is ready to tolerate. Hana? What is the tolerable error? What is the risk of material misstatement? Everything is fed in the system, and softwares are there which selects the sample on random basis, that this invoice you pick up, this invoice you pick up. So there are softwares which generate the random samples. Hana? Is it clear? Who's Aditi? ठीक है. ठीक है. Now, what is population? Entire set of data. entire set of data from which a sample is selected, that is 10,000 trade receivables, and about which the auditor wishes to draw conclusions. Okay? So the entire set of data from which sample is selected and about which is what? This entire set of data the auditor wishes to draw conclusion. Ultimately तो population के बारे में देखना है ना. First, he'll be analyzing those 1,000 trade receivables. Based on his analysis about the 1,000, he will be drawing the conclusion about the entire 10,000. Okay? So to draw conclusion, okay? And sample must be representative of the population. It should not happen that with respect to 12 months, only 2 months data has been selected. No, entire population, it should represent the entire population. Okay? Now, there are certain characteristics which should be present in the population so that the sample which we are obtaining is correct. Okay? Why? Because based on our analysis of sample, we will be drawing conclusion about the population, and sample is drawn from population itself. So unless and until population has all these 3 characteristics, we cannot draw an appropriate sample. Okay? So what are these? Population has following characteristics, that is appropriate, or I can say relevant, completeness, and reliable. Appropriateness, completeness, and reliability. We will be discussing these in detail one by one. Okay? See, Dhanilakshmi, your doubt will be cleared later on. Okay? We will be discussing about statistical techniques and non-statistical techniques. Then you will be able to know as to how to draw the samples. Okay? So appropriateness. So the population that we are selecting, it should be appropriate. It should be relevant. It should be relevant for the objective of the audit. Why we want to select a sample from the population. Okay? So that objective should be, that specific audit objective, it should be appropriate for such objective. Okay? Let us try to understand this with the help of an example. Suppose the auditor wants to, he is checking what? Trade payables. Okay? He is checking what? Trade payables. Now he understand, when he has analyzed the trade payables, he thought that the trade payables are understated in the balance sheet. These are what? Understated. Now, if he asks the management to provide him with a list of the trade payables, then this is not the correct population. Why? Because that list will contain all those trade payables only na. Understatement थोड़ी ना पता चलेगा. Why? Because that list must also be understated. है ना? List में से ही तो वो balance sheet में आ रहे हैं ना. But auditor feels that no, these are understated. He has a doubt over the amount at which trade payables had been stated. ठीक है. So now what is the correct population? Which auditor, what is the appropriate population if auditor needs to check the understatement of trade payables? Okay? So he may check the subsequent disbursement if any has been made. Okay? After the balance sheet date, let's say 31st March ke baad, till 5th April, if any subsequent payment disbursement is made, he will check that. If there are any unpaid invoices, he will take that as a population. He will check the supplier's statements. He may check the unmatched receiving reports. Okay? So the population that he is going to select, it should be appropriate for the audit objective. Here our audit objective with respect to checking of trade payables is what? He wants to see whether these are understated or not. he has a doubt that they might be understated. So if he obtains a list from the management, the list will have the same trade payables that is getting reflected in the financial statements. So instead of taking a list of trade payables, he may check the subsequent disbursements. ऐसा तो नहीं है कि बाद में किसी को पे किया गया है, which has not been accounted for on as on 31st March. Later on payment कर दिया है, ठीक है? Any unmatched invoices, he may obtain supplier statement. ठीक है? So the population should be relevant for the audit objective. Why? Because out of that population, the correct sample will be, appropriate sample will be drawn. ठीक है? ठीक है? Now, the second is what? Completeness. Let's say I'm checking the internal control. ठीक है? On a sample basis. So the population which I'm taking, I should check that internal control throughout the period, na? At all times, how is it working? ठीक है? Or let's say trade receivable है. So the entire population should be complete. Whatever should have been recorded should actually have been recorded. So it should have a complete list of trade receivable. That is, the population should be complete. Then only a complete sample will be, a correct sample will be drawn, right? Last but not the least, the population should be reliable. The information you are using to take the sample out, be it related to internal control, be it related to trade receivable, that should be reliable. Hana? Then only the sample that you will be drawing, and you will be analyzing that sample, and then when you will be concluding with respect to the entire population, it is going to be a correct conclusion. Okay? So the population should be appropriate, it should be complete, and it should be reliable. Is it clear? Okay? Let me just discuss sampling unit with you, then I'll look at your queries. So what are sampling units? Individual items. So 10,000 items in our example that make up the population, the trade receivable ka population. Audit procedures are applied on sampling units. Okay? Sampling units, now here it means that sampling units that are selected, audit procedures are applied on them, conclusions are drawn from them, and it is projected on the entire population. So in other words, I can say that conclusion on sample becomes conclusion of the population. Okay? So auditor might feel, auditor might make an analysis that with respect to 1,000 trade receivable, which I have taken as a sample and checked in detail, I found that 5 out of these 10,000, they are misstated. So now he will project it on 10,000, that agar 5 out of 1,000, 5 are misstated, then out of 10,000, 50 can be misstated, and accordingly he will draw the conclusion with respect to the appropriateness of trade receivable. Okay? Is it clear? So this was about sampling unit and population. I hope it is clear. Let me just have a look at your queries. Meanwhile, send in your queries. If any topic is not clear, we'll definitely discuss. See, just try to imagine yourself in a situation where there are lakhs of transactions. Is it possible for you to check all the transactions? No. तो कैसे करोगे? We will select a sample. ठीक है? उस sample को देखेंगे वो ठीक है या नहीं. See, or in other words, if I want to understand that as to what is your understanding of these 6 chapters which you have done so far. So one approach for me is what? I'll ask you each and every topic in this book till chapter number 6. ठीक है? 100% checking. Or I may ask you questions on sample basis. 2 या 3 पूछ लिए, then I'll decide that ठीक है, ये दोनों तीनों question जो भी मैंने पूछे वो आते हैं. So that means entire till chapter number 6 you have actually understood and learned. ठीक है? Now many of you are asking a query कि मैम अगर sample ठीक नहीं निकलता है, ठीक है, तो let us understand this example. I asked you 3 questions, you were not able to answer 1 question. I may ask you another 3 questions. Again, you are not able to answer 1 question. I may ask you another 3 questions. again you are not able to answer, then I'll tell you na that you haven't learned it. Same way, auditor will select a sample, he'll do the checking. If there is any deviation or misstatement, what is deviation and misstatement we will discuss. So abhi ke liye try to understand, agar us sample mein there is a misstatement, he may select another sample. If again he finds a misstatement, he may select another sample. And if again he finds a misstatement, auditor will change his substantive testing now, that he may now go for 100% checking, right? That since the samples are not coming properly, like there are mistakes in the sample, so he will accordingly, after applying his professional judgment and after applying the type of misstatement, whether it is material or not, everything auditor will consider, he will redecide his substantive procedures. Okay, clear? Extrapolation means Hiral, extrapolation is a word that has been used in a module. I'll take you to the module, then I'll tell you. It is basically inferring. That is the conclusion with respect to sample. Now you are inferring it about the population, estimating about the population based on your conclusion about the sample. Okay, I'll take you through the module, just a minute. See, Hitesh, the work of the auditor is to give an opinion on the financial statement as a whole. So while he's checking each and every assertion, each and every item in the financial statement, he may apply audit sampling. And when he has applied all the audit procedures, he had done audit sampling, he will combine his conclusion with respect to each and every assertion, and then he'll give his final opinion. Then his work is over. Okay, Hitesh? Specific audit objective here, like I gave you example, that if he wants to check the understatement of trade payables, then checking the list is not a correct population. Now, why? Because your list management will give, it will have the understated creditors only. Now, what will be the correct population in that scenario? He may check the subsequent disbursements, the unmatched invoices, the supplier statement. Okay? ठीक है, is it clear? Karthik is saying clear, no doubt. ठीक है, let me just take a look at your queries. Hitesh, is your query clear with respect to the work of the auditor? Hiral, with respect to extrapolation, I'll take you through the module. Specific audit objective clear है, ठीक है? Subsequent disbursement, Aditi, it means that let's say subsequent to 31st March. डेट ऑफ क्लोजर ऑफ फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट, उसके बाद अगर लेट्स से 5th April 6th April तक कुछ ट्रांजैक्शन हुई है, सो ऑडिटर विल कंसीडर दैट विल बिकम सब्सिक्वेंट टू द क्लोजर टू 31st March. So how to obtain data about subsequent disbursement, Dhanlakshmi? He can always look at the bank statements of the next month after the closure of the financial year. Next month, April month, he can always have a look that with respect to this creditor कोई payment तो नहीं हुआ है, payment हुआ है, and that auditor is not if payment has been made and that creditor is not coming as on 31st March, that means the creditor was understated ना. Payment तो हुआ है, but आपने उसको as a creditor नहीं दिखाया ना, maybe it was shown as a loan. ठीक है? Here your query with respect to auditor's wish is not clear. Okay? So Hiral, I hope specific audit objective is clear. See, tell me. Let me just explain that trade payable wala example again. ठीक है? तो देखो. Just a minute. See, let's say on 31st March, the close of the year, let's say it is 22, we are conducting the audit for financial year 21-22. Okay? I'm explaining that subsequent disbursement wala point with respect to trade creditors. Okay? Now let's say there was a creditor ABC. Okay? amount was 10,000, and the company, what it has done, it has shown it as a loan and not shown it as a creditor. Okay. Now, till 5th April, auditor finds, then there is a subsequent disbursement. Subsequent is what? Subsequent to 31st March. Disbursement is what? Payment to ABC of 10,000. Now, auditor will ask the management, tell me what is it? Give me the papers with respect to this. Why? Because when he was checking the creditors list, this 10,000 was not coming as a creditor. That means creditors amount was understated. Now here, if auditor asks the management to give a list of trade payables on 31st March, it will not have ABC Limited, because management with an intention to, let's say, to understate the creditors, it has not shown this 10,000. However, subsequent to 31st March, let's say till 5th April or 10th April, there was a payment. So auditor will now see, okay, give me a detail of this transaction. What exactly is this? Give me the papers related to this transaction. Clear? Okay. Krishna Sharma, is it clear? And Hiral, I'm telling you again that the entire 10,000 trade receivable, they are what? Population. These individual units are what? All the 10,000 are what? Sampling units. And the 1,000 items, 1,000 sampling unit that gets selected is what? Sample. So basically, sample is selected out of these sampling unit only. Okay? So clear? Siddharth, yes, auditor can check the financial statements. He can just have a look at the financial statement of the previous year, the next year. He can always check. Clear? Is it clear? Okay. Now, let me just take you through the module. So we have done what is meant by audit sampling. So it refers to application of audit procedures to less than 100% of items. That is, in our example, 1,000 trade receivables ko will be sending external confirmation within a population of 10,000 relevant under audit, such that all sampling units have an equal chance of selection. Now, what is sampling units? All the items in the population. This is to ensure that items selected represent the entire population. Okay? How will that be possible? We'll see when we'll be discussing statistical sampling. Objective is to provide reasonable basis to draw conclusions about the population from which the sample is selected. Scope, it becomes applicable. So it is not mandatory. Mandatory nahi hai, becomes applicable when the auditor decided to use audit sampling, and the scope is extended to statistical as well as non-statistical sampling. What are these? We'll be discussing later on. And it extends to the entire sampling process. We will see when we will be discussing about sampling process that it consists of designing, selecting audit sample, performing test of control, test of details, and evaluating the results of sample. Okay? SA 500 deals with auditor's responsibility to design and perform audit procedure to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence to draw a reasonable conclusion on which to base audit opinion. SA 500 lays down the means available to the auditor for checking the items for testing. One of those means is audit sampling. SA 530 complements SA 500. What are the three means? I've written it here. The three means are what? Checking all the transaction, that is 100% checking. Checking the selective items. Here, just a minute. Checking selective items and audit sampling. Okay? What is population? Refers to the entire set of data from which a sample is selected and about which the auditor wishes to draw conclusion. Okay? Characteristic, it should be appropriate. See that example. When testing the understatement of accounts payable, the population would not be accounts payable listing. Why? Because वो list में तो understated ही होगा ना. So what will be the appropriate population? Subsequent disbursements. बाद में तो कोई पेमेंट नहीं हुआ है, जो creditors तो नहीं दिखाए हैं, but later on उसको पे कर दिया है. Unpaid invoices, supplier statement, unmatched receiving reports, or other population that would provide audit evidence with respect to or understatement of accounts payable. Completeness means, for example, I gave example of what? Internal control. That when the auditor is checking internal control, it should include that at all relevant times. ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए that when a sample is been selected, the auditor is seeing whether it is working in April or May or not. Throughout the year, whether it is working or not. And it should be reliable. The information from which sample is drawn, it should be what? Reliable. Okay? What is sampling unit? The individual items that make up the population is called sampling units. Okay? Audit and see extrapolation. Cyril, that this is your doubt now. So basically estimation. Okay? You have drawn a conclusion on a sample and then you are going to generalize it on the entire population. कि अगर 1000 sample में there is a mistake of 5, तो 10,000 में कितना mistake होगा? ठीक है? So that is called extrapolation, estimating for the entire population, generalizing for the entire population. ठीक है? So it is a selection from population that is used as extrapolation of the population. That is, you're generalizing about the population. In other words, audit procedures are applied on these units and the conclusions drawn from them are projected on the population. That is, the conclusions drawn on sample becomes the conclusion of the population from where it is drawn. Example, see, if the auditor's objective were to test the validity of accounts receivable, whether these accounts receivable are valid or not, the sampling unit could be defined as customer balance or individual customer invoices. The auditor defines the sampling unit in order to be efficient and effective sample to achieve particular audit objective. The conclusion on the population is based on audit procedures applied on the sampling unit. Clear? Is it clear? So basically the particular assertion that the auditor wants to check, the population will consist of that document only, na? Clear? Clear? Is it clear? So in case you have not studied about SA 500 ka means, I have told you now, Karthik. Okay. Now we have seen that sample must be representative of the entire population. It should not happen that only a particular kind of sale. Let's say there are 4 or 5 types of sale in an organization. So it should not happen that only one type of sale has been tested as a sample by the auditor. It should represent the entire population, be it a statistical or a non-statistical approach. ठीक है? Statistical, non-statistical approach क्या होता है? We will see. अभी I'll discuss with you this diagram and उसके बाद we will take a break. ठीक है? Now, if you remember, I asked you a question. कि बताओ whether audit sampling can be applied with respect to test of control, A, or test of detail, B, and the C option was both. And many of you said that with respect to both the sampling, this can be applied, audit sampling. ठीक है? So Dhanla Lakshmi is now saying, ma'am, concepts are crystal clear, which is very good. Meghna, Hiral, Prabhas, Pothina, they are saying, ma'am, it is clear. So now the topic is sampling process can be performed with respect to test of control and test of details. Now, for all those who are asking me to repeat or to explain as to what is test of control and test of details, I will not explain this. Why? Because you all have done this in detail in chapter number 3. Okay? So you may refer to that video. But for the purpose of this topic, I'll just give you a brief as to what is test of control. So see, basically wants to say, when the auditor is checking the internal control which has been implemented by the management, how will auditor do that? He will perform certain audit procedures. Hana, this do you remember? This is called what? Test of controls. When he is checking what? Internal control. ठीक है. What is test of details? When the auditor is checking the transactions and accounting balances, again by performing what? Audit procedures. These are called what? Test of details. Substantive testing. Remember? ठीक है. Now see student, when there is a mistake in, let's say, trade receivable, we call it what? Misstatement. ठीक है. That, let's say, the with respect to 1,000 trade receivable, the sample that is selected, there is a misstatement in 5. They are not, the GST calculation is not correct. ठीक है. Misstatement. But I cannot say that with respect to internal control that there is a misstatement. The word that I'll use is what? Deviation. Deviation from the expected internal control. Deviation from the expected internal control. Let's try to understand this with the help of an example. Okay? So I'll give you an example of both test of control and test of details as to how sampling is applied in test of control and test of details. Okay? Now let's say auditor has to check one of the internal controls, which is that auditor knows that with respect to traveling expenses, any of the traveling expense exceeding rupees 10,000 is signed by 2 authorized signatory. This is what? One of the internal control. This is what? One of the internal controls designed, implemented, maintained by the management. Okay? Auditor, when he analyzed the data, he saw that there are, let's say, 10,000 instances where the payment is more than 50,000. Now, when he's checking the internal control, he cannot check all these documents, all these 10,000 documents. So he may select, let's say, 25 samples on a random basis. And with respect to those, he'll check whether these are actually signed by 2 signatories or not. Okay? So he selected a sample in order to see whether the internal control is operating effectively or not. Okay? Now, when he selected 25 samples, 25 sampling units, and this was his sample. Okay? Now, when he checked these 25 with respect to the internal control, what was the internal control? That they should be signed by 2 authorized signatories. Okay? He found that there is a deviation in one of the sample. That is, one of such sample is not signed. I cannot say there is a misstatement. I'll say there is a deviation in internal control. Deviate कर गए ना, जो expected था. क्या expected था? That there will be sign of 2 authorized signatory, but there was a deviation. है ना, उससे कुछ अलग हुआ. क्या अलग हुआ? That it was signed by 1 authorized signatory with respect to 1 sampling unit. Now, what will auditor do? He may take another sample. If again he finds a deviation, he may then decide that, okay, I'll revise my assessment. I'll not rely on the internal control with respect to traveling expenses. They are not effective. They are not operating effectively. I will go for a detailed checking. Now, when he comes to test of details, after analyzing the test of control with respect to traveling bills, and he finds that they are not operating effectively, auditor may now change his strategy that I'm not relying on internal control with respect to traveling bills. And when I'm actually checking, I'm performing the substantive procedure with respect to traveling, I'll check all the transactions. Sampling nahi karni hai. Why? Because controls are not effective. Clear? So control mein kaise sample lagega? Clear? And accordingly, he'll decide what? Based on the conclusions from here. यहाँ से क्या conclude किया? That internal control on traveling bills are not good. So he may decide, ठीक है, I'll go for a detailed checking. Clear? ठीक है? Clear? Now, let's take another example, like another situation in this example. When auditor was checking these 25 units sampling units in order to check the internal control, he finds that 25 are all as per expected internal control. Sub per there were signatures of 2 signatory. Now he decides that he will rely on internal control. He'll continue with his strategy to rely on internal control. He comes to test of details. But when he is checking, let's say here also he has selected certain sample. Now when he's checking, let's say out of what, for example, 10,000, let's say he's checking 500 bills now in order to do the substantive checking ki calculation proper hai ya nahi, proper, everything he is checking, whether it is properly accounted for or not. Now he sees that with respect to these 500 now, abhi to he has taken a sample of 25 units only now. If here he finds that nahi, these samples have some misstatement, these samples have certain misstatement, he may revise his assessment with respect to what the extent of checking that he has decided. He decided that he'll go for sample checking. Now if he finds that there is a misstatement, he may take another sample. Again there is a misstatement, then auditor can always decide that I'll go for 100% checking, now no sampling. ठीक है, clear? Hiral, yes. Test of details is vouching and verification that you have done in chapter number 3 in detail. Clear? Is it clear? Okay. So how audit sampling is relevant when auditor is performing TOC, test of control, that is when he's checking the operating effectiveness of control. So agar usme there is a difference, so that is called deviation. Okay. Same way, if there is a difference with respect to the test of details, when he's checking the transaction, GST is wrongly calculated, let's say with respect to a particular voucher, so that is called misstatement. But internal control mein you will not say misstatement word na, what will you say? Deviation. So deviation is used in this chapter with respect to test of controls, and the term misstatement is used with respect to what? Test of details. Okay. Now is it clear? Let me just have a look at the queries that you are sending. Just give me 2 minutes. See, Prabhas, why the word expected internal control is mentioned? Because what was expected? That internal control, such internal control has been implemented that it is expected that with respect to traveling expense of exceeding 50,000, there will be sign of 2 signatories. है ना, there will be approval of 2 signatories. So ये आप expect करके चल रहे हो ना, but there is a deviation to identify deviation, difference from the expected internal control. Clear? See, Pothina, if the population is large, auditor will go for audit sampling. Okay? But ultimately, auditor has to follow certain standards and techniques. Like we'll be studying about statistical sampling, okay, where he will be using random selection of the sample. He will be doing random selection of the sample. So in that case, the statistical sampling technique that is used, that will give him an accurate result. Okay? So that is the difference between statistical and non-statistical sampling, which we'll be discussing later on. And see, if the results are not coming as per the expectation, there is a misstatement, there is a deviation, auditor can always apply his professional judgment and he can change his earlier assessment of risk. Na? Ki bhai, earlier he thought that control risk is not there, that internal controls are effective. But when he checked, he found that they are actually, in fact, not effective. Hai na? So he can always change his extent of checking, his extent of substantive testing. ठीक है, Prabhas, is it clear? Okay. So if any of yours queries left, you can send it again, because it often happens that I do not receive the query, or it might happen that in a number of query, your query is missed by me. So before taking a break, let us just have a look at the topics that we have covered. We have understood why there is a need of sampling when we are doing audit. ठीक है. So SA 530 is there, whereby we have understood the meaning of the term audit sampling, what is the objective, what are the scope, what is meant by population, it should be appropriate, complete and reliable, what is meant by sampling unit, and we have seen that sampling process is performed with respect to test of controls also and with respect to test of details, and I have given you example. Now many of you are asking, ma'am, कैसे होगा ये sampling and everything. So the next topic is approaches to sampling, which is what? Statistical sampling and non-statistical sampling. So we will do one thing. We will take a break of 10 minutes here. And then after the break, we will start this topic, which is very, very important and very interesting. Meanwhile, you can all send me whether you have understood or not. And you can all send in your queries to me. Okay? So we take a break of 10 minutes here. Ayaz, break is done. So students, I hope you all are back after the break. So I can see there are 2-3 queries. Let me just resolve them and then I'll start the topic approaches to sampling. So Hiral is saying that, ma'am, please explain what is sampling unit and sample. Dekho, Hiral, I gave you this example. So students, all these grapes are what? Sampling units, and they form all these sampling units, they form what? A population. Out of all these sampling units, 2 grapes are selected. They become what? Sample. So sample is selected out of the sampling unit itself. In our example, there were 10,000 trade receivable. So each and every individual trade receivable is what? Sampling unit, and all the sampling units together form what? A population. Out of these sampling units, 1,000 sampling units are selected. They become what? Sample. Clear? Clear, Hiral? Okay, and then Mr. U Bhartwaj, I'm not getting your queries, so you can send your queries again. Okay, and Karthik, your summary is absolutely correct. Okay, and then deviation means difference from the expected internal control. जो आपने internal control implement किया था, there is a difference from that. है ना? What was the internal control? That the traveling expense voucher will be signed by 2 signatories. This is one of the internal controls now, which is not actually happening. ठीक है, तो deviation. ठीक है, and Himanshu, you are correct in whatever you have written. ठीक है, so I hope all of your query is clear. Now let us move on to the next topic. Krishna is asking, ma'am, ये सब learn कैसे करना है? So for that, I think sir is sharing beautiful techniques with you. And further, as I always say, that learn after understanding. Okay? Cramming is not something which I'll recommend Krishna and other students. I'll recommend you to understand first. Concept की जब clarity आ जाएगी ना, then as sir says that definitions को learn करो, है ना? Then rest of your language, you can use that language, but yes, keywords you need to learn. Okay? So take a highlighter or just circle the keywords, and then connecting words can be your own language. Okay, Krishna? Test of details, I cannot explain in detail, Ashish, but yes, test of detail is what? When the auditor is checking the transactions and account balances, when he is doing vouching and verification. Test of control is what? When he's checking the internal control, कि internal control ठीक है या नहीं, और test of detail की अब actual में depreciation calculation ठीक है या नहीं, है ना, GST calculation ठीक है या नहीं, जो trade receivables है वो correct amount पे आ रहे हैं या नहीं, तो that is what test of details. ठीक है, in order to understand this test of detail topic in detail, you can always view your videos available with respect to chapter number 3. Okay. Now, what are the approaches to sampling? So many of you were asking that, ma'am, you are saying again and again that sample should be a true representative of the entire population. So how is that possible? And there are 2 approaches, 2 ways of sampling, audit sampling. One is statistical sampling, and the other is non-statistical sampling. Statistical sampling and non-statistical sampling. First of all, we'll try to understand what statistical sampling. Okay? So as the name suggests, when the auditor is applying statistical sampling, basically what he's doing, he's applying certain statistical theories to select the sample, to evaluate the sampling results. He's applying certain statistical theories. He's applying certain probability theories, certain mathematical theories. Okay? And he's also measuring the sampling risk characteristics. What is sampling risk? That I'll be discussing in the next session. See, a risk is always associated when we are doing what? Audit sampling. So this statistical technique, it takes into account the sampling risk also. ठीक है. So random selection of data is there, and the auditor uses probability theory so that each and every item has an equal chance of selection. ठीक है. So auditor is using what? Random selection. So I told you that big firms, they have softwares. So certain data is required to be fed. For example, you all have understood that what is risk of material misstatement, है ना? Tolerable error. What is tolerable error? कि कितना error auditor can tolerate, है ना? अगर इतना misstatement है, that let's say auditor says that 10,000 का misstatement तो I'm ready to tolerate, but beyond that I'll not tolerate. ठीक है. So auditor will feed all these things in the software, and that software will throw the number of the invoices. For example, with respect to trade receivable, 10,000 thena. So auditor will apply statistical sampling. He will feed these formulas in the system, and these audit softwares, they will automatically generate the number कि first, 10th, let's say 50th, ये वाले सारे invoices check करो, and whatever random number the system will generate, the software will generate, auditor will check those invoices in detail. ठीक है. So random selection is there, है ना? A kind of like auditor is not biased here, ना? Randomly anyone can get selected. ठीक है. So let's say if I ask you, if I tell you that there is a test tomorrow, and I randomly select any of the student, I'm not being biased कि मेरे को इसी से पूछना है. So I'm randomly selecting. So all of you will prepare ना. Same way in random selection, that each and every item has a chance of selection. Auditor may select any of the vouchers without any bias. He is using probability theory, and he is considering the sampling risk also. What is sampling risk? I'll be discussing in the next session. So this is basically scientific method and use of mathematical laws of probability. You all must have done in your statistics and foundation about your confidence level, the sampling error, all these approaches, calculation of R, है ना? So all that theory is what? With respect to statistical theory. And where there are large number of similar transactions. So I told you, let's say wages to 10,000 workers for 12 months is to be checked. Auditor can always use what? Statistical sample. Why? Because there is no personal bias. And in larger organization with huge transaction, auditor should use statistical sampling, whereby when he's selecting a sample, he's not applying his professional judgment, he's using certain established laws of probability, some statistical theories. He's using certain softwares to derive the sample. Okay? What is non-statistical? As the name suggests, which is not a statistical sampling, that is, which is not having the above features. That is neither scientific, that is not using the laws of probability, that is not considering what? The sampling risk. Then how is that sampling done? By using the professional judgment. मतलब कैसे? So auditor uses his professional judgment in order to determine the sample size and composition. For example, let us just try to understand. Auditor is conducting the audit of, let's say, 21-22. ठीक है? He's checking the trade receivables. Now in non-statistical sampling, what can auditor do? He may decide that ठीक है, this year what I'll do with respect to March, with respect to June, with respect to September, I'll check the transactions with respect to the debtors. Since last year, I have checked the transaction with respect to April, July, and August. So auditor last year, he checked the trade receivable transaction in certain different months. This year, he, after applying his professional judgment, he is checking the transaction with respect to March, June, and September month. So what is this professional judgment? There is no statistical theory. There is no probability law. Hana? So based on personal experience and knowledge of the auditor, maybe based on his past experience with the client, auditor will decide the sample, non-statistical, which is not involving any statistics or mathematics. ठीक है? Simple है. It is very common, but see, if auditor, let's say, see, it happens in case of mediocre companies, Hana. So with respect to those where there are maybe small number of transactions, or maybe if there are a certain number of transactions where auditor is applying audit sampling, he's not using any softwares, he's not using statistical sampling, he will apply his professional judgment na कि last year मैंने ये वाला month check कर लिया था, ये वाले all months I have already checked, this year let me just check all these months, ठीक है. So there is a point that auditor, when he's applying non-statistical sampling, that is when he's applying his professional judgment, he should make sure that he should try to avoid a pattern of selection. ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए that every month, as let's say last year, he selected, let's say last 5-day transaction of every month. The auditor tells the management that with respect to all the months, na, April and till March, give me the transaction details of last 5 days. Last year auditor did like this, last 5 days. Okay? Last to last year also auditor did like this. So see, this will, what will happen now? Management now knows that last 5 days ka transaction auditor will definitely check. Hana? So they will become what? Careful that in wali transaction mein there is no mistake. Hana? So that is why there should be an attempt to avoid a pattern of selection. There should always be an element of surprise. See, if you remember when we did scope of SA 530, I told you that it covers statistical as well as non-statistical. So SA 530 is not saying to auditor that use only statistical. It covers both the approaches. Okay? But when the auditor is applying non-statistical, see, case of smaller firms, it happens that auditor uses his professional judgment. वहाँ पर softwares नहीं होते हैं. So auditor should attempt to avoid the pattern of selection. है ना? Element of surprise होना चाहिए ना. Otherwise management is very clever ना. What will it do? कि last 5 days of every month में उन transactions में there is no mistake. Because there is a set pattern of the auditor. So there should be what? Element of surprise. And in order to check the cutoff procedures, what are cutoff procedures? That is towards the close of the year, the transaction near 31st March. ठीक है? इससे ये वाले transactions. So auditor should check these transactions in detail. Large number of items should be checked towards the close of year in order to see whether the cutoff procedure, that is the item that need to be reflected as on 31st March. इस साल जो आना चाहिए वो include हुआ है या नहीं, ऐसा तो नहीं है that is coming in the next year. So cutoff procedure, वहाँ पे cut जहाँ पर लगना चाहिए, whether that has been done or not. So auditor should consider that. Okay? Now tell me, what do you understand? कि non-statistical की we have seen it is common, it is simple, है ना? What are the disadvantages? कुछ disadvantages तो होंगे ना non-statistical के. What are those? Yes, Karthik. Sampling can be done with respect to IT control also. IT specific test of control, automated, manual, a mixture of automated or manual or IT specific. The test of controls, the audit sampling can be used throughout all these processes. Quickly send in what in your understanding will be the disadvantages of non-statistical sampling, also known as what? Judgmental sampling. Tell me. Okay? So see, it is not objective, that is unbiased नहीं होगा ना ये. Auditor unbiased नहीं हुआ ना इसमें. Auditor may feel कि ठीक है मेरे को अप्रैल और मार्च की ही करना है. Between these two months, he's not checking any of the transactions. It is not scientific. Risk of personal bias is there, and it might be possible that sample is not the representative of the population. Why? In our example, auditor has decided कि April or March month का ही check करना है. So these 10 months are not included, na? So now the sample that is drawn from the month of April and March, they are not the true representative of all the 12 months now. They represent only the 2 months now. So that these are the disadvantages. Now, which method to use? So SA 530, the scope extends to both the method. कि दोनों method use कर लो, but when auditor you are using non-statistical, तो थोड़ा सा ध्यान देना that attempt should be made to avoid pattern of selection. There should be element of surprise. You should check a number of transactions towards the close of year. ठीक है? Now, which method? It is a matter of auditor's professional judgment. Auditor को जो ठीक लगेगा according to his professional judgment, according to which will be based on the situation, the client data, the internal control, the accounting and records. He will decide after applying his professional judgment. ठीक है? Prabhas, you are absolutely correct. ठीक है? Meghna, you are correct. Pothina, you are also correct. Personal judgment influences audit, which is absolutely correct, Aditi. Risk of bias selection, Hitesh, you are correct. Sample size may not be a true representative and it may not be sufficient. Akashnil, you are absolutely correct. Okay? Now, my next question to you. Very simple. Itna clear hai? क्या किया हमने आफ्टर द ब्रेक? वी हैव अंडरस्टूड सैम्पलिंग अप्रोचेस. ठीक है, तो एक तो है स्टैटिस्टिकल एंड द अदर इज व्हाट नॉन स्टैटिस्टिकल or judgmental. So as the name suggests, non-statistical, auditor is using his professional judgment, his past experience. He's not using any statistical theory or any law of probability. Why? In case of statistical theories, statistical sampling, he's using certain statistical theories. He's using probability law. He's using what? He's considering the sampling risk characteristic. What is sampling risk? I'll be discussing in the next session. Okay? Now we have understood about the various disadvantages. Okay? Now, what is the extent of checking that the auditor will do? What are the factors that affect the extent of checking? Okay, we will do one thing. Before doing this, let us just discuss this topic. What are the advantages of using statistical sampling? So we are talking about advantages of statistical sampling. So just do one thing, send in your replies, don't look in the module, just try to think कि statistically you are deciding something. Okay? So what are the advantages? You all have done in your statistics in foundation a random selection, sample error, confidence level, everything is you all have done. Yes, Aditi, the auditor can use it based on his professional judgment. Okay? So, see students, when auditor is using statistical sampling, the results are measurable with accuracy and reliability. Why? Because statistical theories are used. Statistical formulae are used. Hai, probability theory is used. Okay? So, first of all, it is measurable with adequacy and reliability. Okay? Now, there are certain advantages. First of all, sample size does not increase in proportion to increase in size of the area tested. So let's say there were 10,000 trade receivable, and by using the statistical approach, the auditor is checking, let's say 500 as sample. Now, if there is an increase in the trade receivable, let's say now next year they become 20,000. So it might happen that the sample may reach to 600 or 700, but there will not be a substantial increase. Why? Auditor is using statistical formulae. Okay? Just try to understand this with the help of an example. Tell me, let's say there is a bowl of soup. You have to taste it. Okay? You may take 2 spoons of this soup and you will be able to give your opinion as to how is the soup. Okay? Vis-a-vis, You are checking a big bowl of soup. Now tell me, again, the 2 spoonful of soup is fine now, in order to see whether this higher quantity of soup is good or not. So it will not happen na, that now you need to have 1 bowl to taste this entire soup. Hai. So when there is an increase in the population, it is not necessary na, that the sample will also increase. Clear? Clear? Samajh aaya ye? Just try to understand this example. You are tasting 1 bowl of soup. You are tasting it by having 2 spoons of soup. Now you are tasting, you have to give your opinion on the entire, let's say, a very big bowl of soup. Okay? Now again, the 2 spoonful of soup will be sufficient. Na? Sample size to utna reh sakta hai na? Though your population has increased. So this is what is meant by the first point. The sample size does not increase in proportion to increase in size of the area tested. Okay? Clear? It is more objective and defensible. Defensible is what? Safe. Why? Because you are using certain formulae to select the sample. It is possible to select a minimum sample size by applying the various formulae, by applying the statistical theory. It is possible for the auditor to have a minimum sample size and obtain a correct analysis about the entire population. Why? Because he is using statistical formulae. He is using the probability theory when he is applying statistical analysis. Statistical sampling, it considers calculated risk and corresponding precision. What is calculated risk? Sampling risk, which I'll be discussing in the next session. So this is one of the advantage, that statistical sampling takes into account sampling risk, calculated risk, and the precision. Precision is what? Accuracy. आपको कितना accuracy चाहिए, कितना risk is acceptable, है ना? So when you are applying the formula, all these are taken into account. Better description of a large mass of data. So when an auditor is applying sampling, statistical sampling in order to obtain a sample, it is a better description vis-a-vis when he is applying non-statistical. Why? Because it is more scientific, it is without personal bias. So is it clear? Is it clear? ठीक है? Clear hai? So these are the various general advantages which you all must have done when you have done your statistical theories in maybe foundation. Okay? Now, next topic, which is factors affecting the extent of checking. Kitna checking karna hai? What are the factors affecting? Now I'll do one thing. I'll ask you a few questions. I need answers quickly. Tell me if there size of organization. How will size of organization determine the extent of checking? Extent of checking कि कितना sample लेना है. So if there is a big organization, tell me the sample size will be more or less. Quickly, I need answers. Send in your reply. कितना extent of checking, कितना sample size लेना है. So size of an organization, if it is big, so will the sample size be, the extent of checking will be more or less? You just need to write more or less. So many of you are saying that more. Obviously, okay? Small organization hai, then auditor. See, in that case, the auditor may check 100% of the transaction. He may not opt for audit sampling. It might be possible, na? Clear hai? Okay? Now, state of internal control. If internal control are effective, tell me the extent of checking will be more or less. So if internal controls are effective, auditor may decide. See, I'm using the term may. Why? Because it all depends upon auditor's professional judgment. But these are the factors that he will keep in mind when he's deciding the sample, be it statistical or non-statistical. So it depends upon size of organization. It might happen that small organization hai, auditor may go for 100% checking. State of internal control, if these are effective, auditor may take less sample. That is, he may go for less substantive checking because internal controls are good. This you all have done in essay 315 also. Adequacy, reliability of books of accounts, है ना? If they are reliable, auditor may go for a lesser sample size. Na? If these are not reliable, auditor may go for 100% checking. Tolerable error range. Tolerable, कितना tolerate कर लेगा auditor error range in case of the when he's testing the internal control, when he's testing the details, what is the tolerable error? Tolerable is what? That if itna error hai, auditor is not going to consider it. It is tolerable, his patience level. Hana? So obviously if the tolerable error range is less, he's going to do more checking. Clear hai? Because he will not tolerate even 1 rupee mistake na. So he will go for a detailed checking. Required degree of desired confidence. Kitna confidence, assurance chahiye. If he needs more assurance, obviously he'll go for more checking. Simple hai? Quickly tell me. Here, point number 4, I'll be discussing it again when we will do sampling risk in the next session. So basically that point number 4 of advantages says that it considers the sampling risk and accuracy with which the result is required. So this is one of the advantages. So students, tell me, is it clear? Simple hai na? I'll start from these 2 points. Tolerable error range. If I decide my tolerable error range to be very low, इसका मतलब क्या है? I need to do more and more work. So the extent of checking will be more. Degree of desired confidence. I need more confidence, more assurance on the internal control or the financial statements. So the extent of checking will also increase. Na? Jitna confidence ज़्यादा चाहिए, उतना ज़्यादा checking भी तो करना पड़ेगा ना. Simple है. Adequacy and reliability of books. Books are not adequate, reliable ही नहीं है. तो अब detail में extent of checking will increase na. Simple hai na? Yes, Aditi, tolerable error range has to do something with materiality level also. You all have done essay 320 जहां पर आपने tolerable error पढ़ा था, है ना? Materiality level पढ़ा था, तो you are absolutely correct. Hitesh Singh ma'am, this topic is simple. ठीक है? तो is it clear? Is this topic clear? Quickly send in your replies. Is it topic clear? Yes, Aditi, effective IC hai to less sample may be taken by the auditor. Akashni is saying if internal controls are effective, auditor may decide to reduce the extent of checking. ठीक है? Clear? Should we proceed further? So our next topic is sampling risk. Just a minute. Next topic is what? Sampling process, not sampling risk. Sampling process. Okay. So Aditi is saying yes, tolerable range varies. Like it involves auditor's professional judgment. We can differ from auditor to auditor. Which last point, Prabhas, please clarify. Okay. Now, if you remember, students, let me just take you through the module. Acha, let me just take you through the topic that we have covered. So we have done what? Statistical, non-statistical. Statistical, ke, what are the main features? It has random selection of sample, use of probability theory to evaluate the results, and it considers what? Sampling risk also. It uses mathematical laws of probability, wide application hai. For example, in these areas, statistical sampling can be used. There is no personal bias. For example, let us just look at this topic. statistical sampling ko we are looking from the module. So an auditor, while verifying the purchases during the year, realized that the purchase transaction in that year are more than 45,000 in numbers. कि transactions 45,000 in numbers से ज़्यादा हैं. Then in such case, statistical sampling will be highly recommended in the audit program. ठीक है? Non-statistical क्या होता है? Based on personal experience and knowledge. This approach has been in common application for years because of its simplicity. पर auditor को क्या करना है? For example, देखो, this beautifully explains the concept of non-statistical sampling. For example, March, June, September may be selected in year 1 and different months would be selected in next year. On the basis of value of items, top 10 highest value items may be selected. So auditor is applying what? Professional judgment. An attempt should be made to avoid establishing a pattern of selection. That is, there should be element of what? Surprise. ठीक है? It is written somewhere. You can just element of surprise should be there. ठीक है? So you can just go through it. And this topic, sampling versus traditional method, it basically says why sampling is required, which we have done earlier. ठीक है? And there is one topic. See, sampling risk is always there. There are certain limitations with respect to sampling also. So a very important, another truth about sampling technique is it can never bring complete reliability. Because ultimately, say if out of 10,000, you are checking the 1,000 trade receivable balance only. So it might be possible that in this 9,000, there is a misstatement, which is material. So complete reliability is not possible because it is a process of estimation. It may have certain errors. Okay? Yes, whether to apply sampling, till what extent auditor will always see what is his tolerable error range. तभी तो concept है ना tolerable error का कि ठीक है 100% result तो नहीं आ सकता ना sampling से. So 2% is my tolerable error range. कि इतना अगर आता है तो there is no problem. ठीक है? You can read this example. ये clear हो जाएगा आपको, easy example. So what are the factors when the auditor is deciding upon the extent of checking? Size of organization, state of IC, adequacy, reliability of books, tolerable error in degree of desired components. So appropriateness, kaun sa appropriate hai? So it is basically talking about advantages of statistical, which you can just have a look. Very simple, 6 points are there. Now this is the sampling process. ठीक है? Clear है? ठीक है? Clear? Prabhas, please mention the page number. Degree of desired confidence. He's asking, Prabhas is asking this. See, if you want more assurance, कि नहीं, I want to be 100% sure about the trade receivables. ठीक है? Because auditor को कुछ doubt है. He wants to be more confident about this. तो वो checking extra करनी पड़ेगी ना. Extra checking करनी पड़ेगी ना. तो extent of checking will increase ना. Is it clear, Prabhas? More confidence चाहिए. ठीक है? Now we are discussing what the process of auditing, and if you remember when we were doing the concept of scope, I told you that this is simply what the process of audit sampling. ठीक है? So say, see, it's mentioned that scope of SA 530, it extends to statistical as well as non-statistical. And when does it apply? It applies when designing and selecting the audit sample. So designing selection of audit sample, I mark it as 1. Performing test of details and test of controls, this is 2, and evaluating the result. Okay? Now when we are discussing about sampling process, see the first point which I marked there, sampling, what was it? Sample, designing and selecting the audit sample. So what is it? Sample design, sample selection, sample size, and sample selection method. So this is my point number 1. Applying the audit procedures. So what was it there? It was performing test of control and test of detail. Test of control and test of details are what? Audit procedures only, applying of those audit procedures on the sample so selected. So this is my second point. And last was evaluating the results. So these 3 are what? Nature and cause of deviation and misstatement, projecting misstatement, and evaluating the results of audit sampling. ठीक है. So these are the various steps of sample process. So first of all, when the auditor, he has to apply audit sampling, first of all he'll design the sample. ठीक है. We will discuss all these one by one, but एक बारी let me just give you a brief with respect to the entire process. So auditor, what is sample design? So it is basically a plan for obtaining sample from a given population. So what is sample design? I will write it in red because this is a dictionary meaning. You all must have known till now that whatever I'm writing in red is just a dictionary meaning. Okay? So you need not cram, but that learn or cram as such all these things which are written in red, because these are just for your understanding. So if you look at the dictionary meaning, sample design is plan for obtaining sample from a given population. So auditor will plan, ठीक है, कि how to obtain a sample, ठीक है, from a given population. So here we will understand that when the auditor has to plan, he has to design the sample, he will understand first of all the population. पहले तो population को समझना पड़ेगा ना कि which is the correct population from which sample needs to be drawn. ठीक है. अब sample कौन सा drawn करना है, which population he has to select, he needs to understand the sample also as to what audit procedure he'll be performing, what audit evidence he need, what is the objective. So this all we will be understanding in the topic sample design. है ना, सैंपल को डिजाइन करना है तो उसके लिए पर्पस तो पता होना चाहिए ना, व्हाट इज द ऑब्जेक्टिव, सैंपल क्यों चाहिए, कहां से चाहिए. ही विल बी अंडरस्टैंडिंग द कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स ऑफ द पॉपुलेशन. एंड हियर यू विल आल्सो अंडरस्टैंड टू concepts of stratification. अभी आई एम जस्ट गिविंग यू अ ब्रीफ ऑफ दिस प्रोसेस. एंड वैल्यूएटेड सिलेक्शन. व्हाट आर दीज, वी विल डिस्कस देम इन डिटेल. ठीक है. सो व्हेन विल बी डिस्कसिंग सैंपल डिजाइन, विल बी डिस्कसिंग अबाउट दीज टॉपिक्स. देखो सैंपल को डिजाइन करना है ना, पॉपुलेशन में से लेना है, सैंपल लेना है, तो पहले तो पर्पस क्या है, ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या है, कौन से ऑडिट प्रोसीजर्स अप्लाई करने हैं, कौन सा ऑडिट एविडेंस ड्रॉ करना है, एंड पॉपुलेशन के क्या कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स हैं, वो कंप्लीट है या नहीं, ऑडिटर विल कंसीडर ऑल दैट थिंग. नाउ सैंपल साइज, it depends upon what, the auditor's professional judgment. Rest we'll be discussing various topics also in this, but just have an idea कि sample size में क्या है, depends upon auditor's professional judgment, and auditor's professional judgment depends upon various factors that we have just done. कि अगर internal control is effective, then he may take a smaller sample size. If the books of accounts are not reliable, he may go for a larger sample size. His extent of checking will increase. ठीक है. तो here we'll be discussing the various factors. Clear है? I'm just giving you an idea as to what we'll be discussing. Selection of items. We will be discussing 5 methods here. What are those 5 methods? You all must have come across these methods like random sampling, systematic sampling, monetary unit sampling, haphazard sampling, and block sampling. These 5 methods we will be discussing when we'll be doing this topic, sample selection method. Okay. What are the audit procedures auditor has to apply? So audit procedures are the same that you have done earlier in chapter number 3, inspection, recalculation, reperformance. Everything is same. Analytical procedures, all the procedures are same. But here you will be understanding one more concept of what, replacement item. Replacement item with respect to the sample. Okay. And when we'll be discussing the next 3 topics of nature of deviation and misstatement, here we'll be understanding in detail about deviation, that is it pertains to what, the test of controls, and misstatement, that is it pertains to what, the financial statements, when the auditor is checking what, the financial statement. Evaluating the results of what, audit sampling, and here we will be considering, we will also understand the concept of sampling risk and non-sampling risk. Non-sampling risk. Clear? Yes, ICAI ORR is correct. Okay? So then we'll be understanding this concept. Is it clear? Is it clear? Here we will also understand the concept of anomaly. Okay? So I'm just giving you an idea as to what all we'll be studying. Okay? Clear? Okay. Now let us start with the first topic, which is sample design. So first, second, and third. First, second, third say I mean this, which I'm writing in red. Okay. Now sample design. Students, please send in your replies whether you are able to understand it or not. Okay. I should be able to know now the way I'm teaching, whether it is helping you out or not, whether it is making the concepts clear or not. So Prabhas, is your point with respect to degree of confidence clear? ठीक है. Sample design. So as I've told you, what is meant by sample design? It is the plan of obtaining sample from the population. So see, the dictionary meaning is what? Plan for obtaining sample from a given population. ठीक है? So Karthik is saying, ma'am, everything is clear. You can take a surprise test. I'll definitely do it on a random basis. ठीक है? So sample design. Okay? So the dictionary meaning says it is the plan for obtaining sample from a given population. So when the auditor decides that okay, with respect to trade receivables, I will be applying audit sampling. Let's say, for example. So first of all, he needs to understand two things. What is the purpose? Why is he performing the audit procedure? What audit evidence he wants to obtain? Okay? And what is the characteristic of the population? ऐसा तो नहीं है that population में there is a deviation. For example, internal control में. See why understanding of characteristic of population is important. See, when I'm drawing a sample from the population, अगर मैंने उसको समझा ही नहीं, if let's say I am understanding the characteristics, I am understanding the internal control, and I realize that there are a number of deviations. बहुत ज़्यादा differences आ रहे हैं from the expected internal control. So will I test this internal control? I may say that I am not checking this internal control. इसमें तो बहुत ज़्यादा problem है. I'll go for detailed checking. I'll increase my substantive testing. So first of all, auditor will have to consider the characteristic of the population when he is designing a sample. He will have to see what are the deviations expected. He will apply his professional judgment. He'll apply the audit procedures in order to see what are the deviations which he is expecting from an internal control. What are the misstatement that he is expecting from any transaction or account balance? See, if they are not good, he will not go for audit sampling. Na? He will check it in detail. He'll increase the extent of checking. He might go for 100% checking. है ना? तो पहले population को तो समझो. If it is not appropriate, if you remember, we did 3 characteristics that should be there in the population. Appropriate होना चाहिए, complete होना चाहिए, reliable होना चाहिए. यही सब नहीं है, तो क्या sample आएगा ठीक से? नहीं. So auditor क्या करेगा? Audit छोड़ देगा? नहीं. He will change his way of extent of checking. He will go for a detailed checking. He'll not rely on internal control with respect to this particular assertion. Clear? ठीक है. सो पहले तो कैरेक्टरिस्टिक समझो ना कि वो जो फीचर्स हैं विच शुड बी देयर इन द पॉपुलेशन विच यू हैव जस्ट डन, एप्रोप्रिएटनेस, कंप्लीटनेस, रिलायबिलिटी, वो हैं भी या नहीं. Because if population is appropriate, complete and reliable, then only a good sample will come, and that then only a correct conclusion will come. ठीक है. So when the auditor is designing the sample, पहले तो population को समझो. Then what is the purpose? What audit procedures the auditor wants to perform? What audit evidence the auditor wants to obtain? है ना. Then what objective you have done, what is the specific purpose, what are the audit procedure, what are the audit evidence, and whether there are any deviations or misstatement in the population, whether the population is complete. After obtaining an understanding, then only such sample design is possible. So if you ask me what is sample design, all these process are a part of sample design only. So if we say that auditor has to design a sample, then he has to design a sample. First of all, he will understand as to the purpose, why a sample is needed, what audit procedures he wants to perform, what audit evidence he wants, then only he'll decide now. And the sample is to be drawn from population. So he will understand the various characteristics of population. Appropriate है या नहीं, complete है या नहीं, reliable है या नहीं. ठीक है. He will see whether there are any deviations or misstatements that he's expecting from the population. Why? I gave you example of internal control. If test of control may he is expecting that there will be a number of deviations, he will not rely on test of detail now. Sorry, test of control. He will not perform test of control. He'll decide not to rely on internal control. He'll straight away go for extensive substantive checking. He may not go for audit sampling. So पहले देख तो लो how is the population. What is the purpose of selecting a particular sample? So this was all about what sample design. Okay. So we'll be doing this topic in detail. You can always get a question, a 4-mark question with respect to what is audit sample design. Okay. So we were doing this. Sample design is the first step of the sampling process. So what is it? See. When designing the audit sample, the auditor shall consider the purpose of audit procedures and the characteristics of population. Okay, abhi we are not doing sample size, we are not doing these two topics, we'll be doing this. So this paragraph talks about first, second and third topic. So abhi we are doing the first step. Sample design में तो क्या क्या देखना है. So when designing an audit sample, the auditor's consideration include what specific purpose to be achieved and the combination of audit procedure. What is the purpose you want to achieve? आपको understatement देखना है trade payables का. You want to see the overstatement. आपको क्या देखना है? Which assertion you want to check? What audit procedures you are going to perform? What is the nature of audit evidence you are considering to achieve? What is the possible deviation or misstatement? Deviation is from what? Internal control. Misstatement is in what? Financial statement. है ना? And other characteristics. ठीक है. SA 500, it emphasizes that auditor, whenever you are performing audit procedure, just see the population is complete or not. So whether the population is complete or not. ठीक है. Is it clear? See, if the expected rate of deviation is unacceptably high, the auditor will normally decide not to perform test of control. तो पहले population, let's say auditor is checking internal control, तो उसके population के characteristics तो देख लो. If the deviations are such that it is unacceptably high, auditor accept नहीं कर सकता यार. Because out of, let's say 100 times when the internal control was required to operate, with 50 times it was not working. So it is highly unacceptable. Na? So auditor will say, I'll not perform test of control, further test of control, I'll straightforward go for what? Extensive checking. Similarly, for test of details, the auditor makes an assessment of expected misstatement in the population. कितना expect कर रहे हैं population को. If expected misstatement is high, 100% examination or use of larger sample size may be appropriate when performing test of detail. Clear? तो sample design ऐसे थोड़ी ना auditor will just select certain items. पहले तो he will see ना what is the population, what is the purpose, why he has to select a sample, what audit procedures he want to perform, what audit evidence he want to obtain, what are the characteristics of the population, है ना? Whether it is complete or not. Why? Because if internal control, let's say, is not good, he will not go for test of detail. Na? Further, उस पे time waste क्यों करना है if it is not effective? He will go for a detailed substantive checking. Same way, if he finds misstatement, then he cannot afford to just go for audit sampling. He may go for 100% examination. Clear? Now, when the auditor is understanding the various characteristics of the population, okay? So let us try to understand the next topic with the help of an example. Suppose there are sales of a company. Let's say a car company is there. There are sales. Such sales are divided as North India, South India, East India, and Western India. In 4 parts it is divided. Okay? So one way of understanding the characteristics of the population is to look at the entire population as a whole. Okay? This is my first way. Entire population as a whole. As a whole. Another way can be, I divide this population as north, south, east, west, and then I analyze each of these population characteristics, and then I select the sample from each of these different types of sales. So I'm dividing the sales with respect to certain criteria. So here my criteria is what? North, south, east, west. Now tell me, first or second, which one is better? Quickly tell me. Yes, Karthik, you are absolutely correct. Second one. Hana? So why? Because see, the population consisted of some different data. Different hai na? Region wise. What auditor has done, he has divided this into similar सब population. अब ये north का हो गया, ये south का हो गया, ये east का हो गया, ये west का हो गया, ठीक है? और let's take another example. Trade receivable है. So one of the option is to look at all the 10,000 trade receivable का balance at one go, and the other option is, the second one is to divide the trade receivable balance as per their age, कि कौन सा trade receivable, कौन सा debtor is outstanding for how many days. Is it outstanding for 60 days, 180 days, 120 days, 180 days, 360 days? By age. So this can be another criteria. Or auditor may divide the trade receivable with respect to the value. High value item ko, he may divide the population into based on the value, and then he will consider the characteristics, and out of those sub-population, why sub-population? Because this was the entire population. Now I have divided this population into 4 parts. Now sub-population ban gaya na. So which one is better? Obviously the second one. It will be more efficient na. Okay? Why? See, if I look at the sales north, south, east, west, I look at the total figure, okay, and I take a sample, chances are there na that since the population is not divided, I may get more of the sample from north. It might be possible na, because I have not divided the data. बट व्हेन आई डिवाइड द डेटा एंड आई टेक इक्वल सैंपल कि नॉर्थ में से भी 10 आई विल टेक, साउथ में से भी 10 आई विल टेक, ईस्ट में से भी 10 आई विल टेक एंड वेस्ट में से भी 10 आई विल टेक, तो दैट गिव्स अ ट्रू पिक्चर ऑफ द एंटायर डेटा ना, vis-a-vis of the first situation whereby I'm just randomly selecting from all the data, all India sales without bifurcating them. So chances are there that I may select maximum of the North Indian sale. ठीक है. So this process of dividing the heterogeneous is different population into homogeneous. What is homogeneous? Similar population is called what? Stratification. ठीक है. And students, all these, let me just mark them with a highlighter. This subpopulation, north, south, east, west, these are called what? Stratum. These are called stratum. ठीक है. And each unit in the population, जितना भी north के sales हैं, जितना भी south के sales हैं, they will be called strata. Simple है. क्या किया? Entire population था ना, since it was different. So in order to improve the efficiency, in order to make audit sampling effective, I divided the population based on similar characteristics. It can be money value, it can be region wise, it can be age wise, or any criteria based on my professional judgment as an auditor. And now out of those subpopulation, I'll be taking out the samples. So selecting out of the stratified or out of the stratum is going to be a better representative of the entire population. Clear है? Simple है? Age और ट्रेड रिसीवेबल से आई मीन कि कितना पुराना आउटस्टैंडिंग है आपका डेटर. इज इट आउटस्टैंडिंग फॉर मोर देन 60 डेज, मोर देन 30 डेज, 120 डेज, कितना पुराना है? बिकॉज अगर जितना भी पुराना होगा, ऑडिटर विल एक्सटेंड हिज ऑडिट प्रोसीजर ऑन दोज ना, बिकॉज इफ एनी ऑफ द ट्रेड रिसीवेबल हैज नॉट बीन रिसीव्ड beyond 180 days from the due date, it means it can be doubtful. So auditor may want to check those trade receivable in detail. जो अभी 30 days ही पुराने हुए हैं, auditor may not want to send external confirmation to those, but which are outstanding for more than 180 days, auditor will definitely want to know whether these are recoverable or not. Clear? Karthik, is it clear? Stratum is what? This population, जो सब population है ना, सब population समझ आता है? जो भी each you have divided the entire population into certain groups, that sub population is called stratum. ठीक है. एक एक ब्लॉक बन गया ना, उसको क्या बोलते हैं? स्ट्रैटम. और स्ट्रैटम के अंदर जितने भी सेल्स हैं, जैसे नॉर्थ रीजन की सेल्स क्या होगी? स्ट्रैटम. अब नॉर्थ रीजन सेल्स के अंदर जितने भी आइटम्स हैं, ABC, XYZ, these are called strata. Technical names हैं which are being used. ठीक है. Units under this subpopulation is called what? Strata. ठीक है. Clear है? Now we have seen that stratified sampling में what we have done, we have divided the different population into similar population so that effective and efficient sample can come. It can be based on age, region, or anything as per auditor's professional judgment. ठीक है. Now the second one is what? Second one is, just a minute, value weighted selection. So as the name suggests, see, stratified में तो any criteria as per auditor's professional judgment. I gave you example of region, I gave you example of age, I gave you example of monetary value also. So value weighted selection is what? When the auditor is performing test of details, है ना, financial statements को check कर रहा था, तो based on the value, monetary value, he may divide the population. For example, trade receivable है, so he may say that up to 2,50,000 there is a group. ठीक है. 2,50,000 1 to 10 lakh there is another group. He may make a group of 10 lakh 1 to, let's say, 20 lakhs. So he's dividing the population, but this is based on what value now? Monetary value only. Hana? So this is called value weighted selection. So when the auditor is understanding the characteristics of the population, and then when he's drawing the sample, so if he applies these techniques, the stratification or value weighted, he will be in a position to understand the characteristics of the population in a better way, and thus he will be able to draw a better sample which will be a true representative of the entire population, vis-a-vis a situation whereby he's just analyzing the entire population as a whole without dividing it into parts. Okay, so let us just have a look at this definition. So why we are studying this topic here in sample design? Because it says that when the auditor is considering the characteristics of the population, he may consider two things: stratification or value weighted selection. Okay, so in considering the characteristics of population from which sample will be drawn, the auditor may determine that stratification or value weighted selection technique is appropriate. SA 530 mein, if you just have a look at SA 530 from the auditing pronouncements, you will see in appendix, it is given in, I think, appendix number 1, it is given that what is stratification and value weighted selection. So what is stratification? Audit efficiency may be improved if the auditor stratifies, divides a population. Stratifies is what? He classifies a population by dividing it into discrete. Discrete is what? Different. Stratifies is what? Classifies in subpopulation which have identifying characteristic. So within a population, they have certain common features, like north की सारी sales आ रही है, south की सारी sales आ रही है, ठीक है? What is the objective? To reduce variability. कि difference है ना, variance है ना, of items within each stratum, and therefore allow sample size to be reduced without increasing a sampling risk. Hana? You can select, now when you will select a sample, since the data is stratified, you will get a true representative. So sampling risk will not reduce. For example, let me just explain to you. Suppose there were, let's say, 20 north, south, east, west. Okay? 20 transactions. Okay? 5 each. Auditor was selecting, let's say, 4 transactions. So if he has not stratified, so it might be possible now that he obtains both the samples, all the samples from north and south. So there will be what? Sampling risk then. But now when the data is stratified, it will be sure that he'll obtain the sample, one from each. So the sample size can be reduced. Okay? He need not increase the sample size, and the sampling risk will not increase. Okay? So it's saying that while performing test of details, you may stratify as per monetary value. Okay? It may be stratified as per age also, doubtful accounts, bad debts. Okay? Stratification, what is the definition? Dividing a population into discrete, that is different subpopulation which have identifying similar characteristics is called stratification. Each subpopulation is called stratum, and units under those population are called what? Strata. Simple. Yes, it will help in, Meghna, yes, you are absolutely correct. It will help in better analysis by the auditor. And Hiral, I hope now your doubt with respect to stratum and strata is clear. So stratum क्या है? Subpopulation. उस population में जितने भी items हैं, that are called what? Strata. ठीक है? So you can read this example. It beautifully explains the concept of stratification when it is divided based on value. Okay. Now, what is value weighted selection? When performing test of details, it may be efficient to identifying sampling units as individual monetary units. For example, the accounts receivable balance, the auditor may then examine the particular items, individual balances that contain those monetary units. I gave you example ना कि 0 to 2,50,000 का ये एक block हो गया, एक हो गया, and value weighted. He has given value. One benefit of this approach is what? Audit effort is directed to larger value items. because they have greater chance of selection. When auditor has stratified it, so when auditor has divided, he has selected the higher value items, so he will perform more audit procedures with respect to that particular area na, which he has considered as a higher value item. So in value weighted selection, the sample size, its selection, evaluation result is a conclusion in monetary amounts. So what is the difference? Stratification mein, so there can be any criteria, region wise, age wise, value wise, based on auditor's professional judgment and the assertion that he's checking. But here it is based on what? Value only. Okay? Is it clear? So with this, we have done the topic of sample design. So I'll not take a fresh topic now, but we will just have a look at what we have done today. Okay? And I expect that you all will go through the module and you all will come in the next session with your queries, if any, and please start learning. Start following the techniques that CA Rajesh Sachdeva sir has told you. He'll definitely come in the next session and you can ask all your queries. Okay? So we started with understanding कि traditionally क्या होता था, 100% checking होता था. But economically wasteful है. Why? Because उतना satisfaction तो 100% satisfaction is not possible. Time and cost ज़्यादा लग जाता है. So auditors realize that it is possible to get good satisfaction by checking less transaction. That is called what? Sampling. Yes, auditor has to follow certain standards and techniques. And now you know कि statistical sampling follow करेंगे तो there will be chances that the sample is a representative of the entire population. ठीक है? Now try to link the topics. ठीक है? Please students stay with me for the next 3 minutes only. ठीक है? This revision is definitely going to help you. So what is the objective? To draw conclusion about the population. Scope is what? It is not mandatory, but it is applicable when audit sampling is done. Statistical may be, non-statistical may be, and throughout the process. Or SA 500 has given 3 means. That is, you may test all the transaction, you may test specific item, or you may go for audit sampling. How to go about audit sampling is explained in SA 530. So therefore, we say that SA 530 complements SA 500. What is population? The entire set of data about which the auditor wants to draw the conclusion. What are the characteristics? It should be appropriate. I gave you example of understatement of trade payables. है ना? तब list लेके क्या करोगे? Because वो भी understated होगा ना. तब तो आप subsequent disbursement देखो, unpaid invoices देखो, suppliers statement, external confirmation मंगवाओ, है ना? So in that case, that will be helpful. Complete होना चाहिए, reliable होना चाहिए. Sampling unit क्या होता है? In the population, all the individual items form sampling unit. Out of those sampling units, certain items are selected which become sample, and sample should be selected in such a way that they are a true representative of the entire population. ठीक है? Sample must be representative. बेशक statistical हो, non-statistical हो, और sampling आपका test of control. When you're checking the internal controls, तब भी लगता है. In order to see the deviations. What is deviations? Difference from the expected internal control. We will not use the word misstatement with respect to internal control. Deviation है ना, कोई process है ना, है ना, तो उससे डेविएट होंगे ना. एंड टेस्ट ऑफ डिटेल्स क्या होता है? फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट का चेकिंग टू आइडेंटिफाई मिसस्टेटमेंट ऑफ अकाउंट बैलेंस एंड क्लास ऑफ ट्रांजैक्शन. ठीक है? अप्रोचेस क्या है? स्टैटिस्टिकल, नॉन स्टैटिस्टिकल. स्टैटिस्टिकल के 3 इंपॉर्टेंट फीचर्स क्या है? वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट क्वेश्चन, 3 मार्क नोट भी आ सकता है, ट्रू फॉल्स भी आ सकता है, एनी लाइक यू कैन मार्क इट एज इंपॉर्टेंट. सो रैंडम सिलेक्शन होता है, देन प्रोबेबिलिटी थ्योरी टू इवैल्यूएट, है ना, the sample results, and consideration of what? Sampling risk characteristics also. These features are not present in non-statistical. So statistical is more scientific. It uses mathematical laws. It is reasonably wide application. Why? Because there are large number of similar items. Example are these कि अगर आपको payroll check करना है, vouching of invoice करना है, petty cash vouchers करना है, तो you may go for statistical sampling. There is no personal bias. The results of the sample can be evaluated, projected on whole population in a more reliable manner. Huge, large organization may where there is huge transaction, statistical sampling is something which is recommended. Non-statistical में auditor का professional judgment या personal experience and knowledge use होता है. It is simple, but SA 530 says that auditor, listen, you need to have an element of what? Surprise. So try to avoid the fixed pattern of selection. Otherwise क्या होगा, management will become what? Clever. Management may become what? Alert that auditor always checks in this pattern. So in these transactions, there should be no mistake. Okay? And here we understood. See, this paragraph na, it beautifully explains ki test of control or kaise lagta hai. You may mark it as a star that read this. Then the concept of how to apply auditing sampling in test of control and test of detail will be clear. Dekho padhte hain. By adopting sampling technique, the auditor only checks a part of the whole mass of transaction. The satisfaction he used to derive earlier, that is by checking all the transactions, can be derived by sample checking, provided he can put reliance on internal control and checks within the client organization because they provide reliability of the records. Okay? Now, sampling is used as a part of test of control. Auditor will check few internal controls and their operating effectiveness. Based on the conclusion derived, he can then design the sample size of test of details. If internal control is satisfactory in design and implementation, a much smaller sample can give the auditor the necessary reliability. On the other hand, if in certain areas control is slack is what? Loose or weak or not properly implemented, the auditor may take much larger sample for getting satisfactory result. So jisko bhi doubt tha na ma'am, test of control, test of details में कैसे apply करेगा. So this is the way how audit sampling is done in while checking internal controls and test of detail. Another truth is what? It can never give complete reliability because inherent limitations तो सभी के होते हैं ना, तो sampling process के भी होते हैं. ठीक है? ठीक है? Is it clear? Now, what are the factors? Size of the organization, state of internal control, adequacy and reliability of books and records, tolerable error range, degree of desired confidence. Okay? Appropriateness, what are the advantages? So, statistical sampling ke jo bhi advantages hai, these are the 6 advantages. You can have a look at this. Sample design. So, population mein se sample lena hai, to characteristics of population. With sample, so auditor needs to understand the purpose. What audit procedure he wants to perform, what audit evidence he wants to obtain, whether the population is complete or not, right? So auditor will understand that, and when he's understanding the characteristics of the population, then auditor will can use either stratification or value weighted selection, so as his understanding of the population will be more accurate, and the selection of sample is going to be more effective and efficient. Okay? So with this, we have covered the first point of sampling. In the next session, I'll be starting with sample size. And before the next session, I would have uploaded the questions with respect to this chapter. So my request to you, please go through the module, read all the illustrations and examples, have a look at the questions that I'll upload before the next session. And then in the next session, we will complete this chapter. We will try to discuss the questions also. Otherwise, I'll be uploading the answers to those questions also. Okay? So you may use that answer sheet. And in the next session, sir will be coming. So please, for all those who have not sent the schedule, their study schedule to sir, please send it to sir and start following the technique. So hoping that this session has helped you, you are able to understand each and every concept, and still in case if there is any query, you can always send in your queries. Okay? So that's all for today. See you on Thursday. Okay? Thank you. Good night.